AI can make us more human. If that sounds like science fiction, according to Dr. Steve Joordens, it's not. He's an award winning cognitive psychologist and professor of psychology at the University of Toronto. He spent his career studying attention, memory, and how we learn. As the head of the Advanced Learning Technologies Lab and co creator of PeerScholar, a platform used around the world to build critical thinking, communication, and collaborative skills, he's also just launched TalkLab, where he's focused on making high touch education possible at scale. Today, we'll explore all of that and how AI is reshaping. Today, we'll explore all of that and how AI is reshaping cognition, memory, communication, and trust. Good morning. How are you? Okay. Our attention spans actually shrinking, or are our distractions simply growing? So we're so split between screens and tasks and stretched. Are our attention spans really shrinking? Or, what is that all about?
We hear that a lot, and I always feel it's the real wrong way to think about it. It's kind of disguising what's really happening. Things like cognitive abilities like attention spans don't suddenly shrink across 1 or 2 generations, but the world changes, and changes in the world can affect our ability to attend. And so, I like to say you can take a young person, take their phone away and put them in a Tolkien movie, and they can sit there for 3 hours and watch the movie. They're capable of that. But I said, take their phone away. The critical thing that's happening now is so many technology companies have sort of weaponized a very primitive reaction our brain has, which is anytime something suddenly appears in our world, it attracts our attention automatically, whether we want it to or not. And so we call these onsets. And it was for a good reason, right? If we were gathering berries and a bear suddenly appeared, we want our attention on that bear and we want to know, oh, what should we be doing? Now, of course, with a phone, think of notifications, beeps, buzzes, whatever's, those are to the brain just like a bear that appeared. Something new just happened and it pulls our attention to that. And when we mix that with our addiction to phones, this thing where we get randomly rewarded every now and then by our phone. Somebody shared your podcast. And then there's all these great comments going on about it. Every now and then you read it and you go, yeah, that's really cool. It doesn't happen all the time. Quite often we look at the phone, nothing exciting happens. But every now and then something does. And those random rewards really make us want to know. So when we combine that, we're trying to think about X, but then we get a little bing and we want to know. And by the time we look, X is gone. And so it's not so much that our attention span was short. It's that we keep getting pulled away by all of these notifications, all of these distractions that are around us. That's the biggest things I try to teach students. I joke with them and I say, on the side of that phone, there's a button. It's called an on-off button. You can turn your phone off for periods of time, focus your mind.
I mean, these platforms and the makers of these phones have really sort of tapped into psychology, and we're
Absolutely.
all working for them. And I work in communications, and I just wonder, why is this not more regulated? Because we're all slaves to these platforms
Yep.
that are selling at something. And I think it's interfering with our lives.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. There's a team of psychologists behind all of these things that are intentionally designing these, knowing how the brain will react, and their primary goal is what they call engagement. They want your eyes on the phone, on their app, on their whatever, where they're advertising, where they're doing whatever. And that's their goal, is to get your mind there. And yeah, if we just carry this around with us and we don't say, hey, hang on, maybe I'm okay with that sometimes, my downtime, but maybe there's other times when I need to get something done and I don't want to be distracted. That's what I wish students would learn, is how to take control of that, how to let them decide. Right now, I need my focused attention. Some other time after I'm done working, yeah, then I can have the notifications binging and bopping me around, and that's perfectly fine. But if that's happening all day, then the problem is we never think about anything deeply. We're always walking around in a half distracted state. We're seeing drivers hitting pedestrians because the drivers are distracted and the pedestrians are distracted. There's so much of life we're missing because we're so connected all the time to these notifications and those random rewards. And it really is changing the way we interact with the world.
Yeah, I mean, do you see that stopping anytime soon? Or do you see any our governments getting involved? Or is it just something that we're going to have to, it's part of our evolution?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, I don't have a lot of faith in corporations changing anything, unless there was some firm regulations, and then figuring out how you would regulate that can be tricky. I think ultimately the problem is going to lie on us. It's going to be us understanding what they're doing to us, hopefully getting a little annoyed, like hopefully like, hey, hang on, you don't have the right to kind of tell me what I'm attending to at any given time, and then teach people you can control it. There's a funny in school circles. There's this funny little technique that students are really excited about called the Pomodoro technique, and they'll share this. Have you heard about the Pomodoro technique? The Pomodoro technique is turning on an egg timer for 20 minutes, sitting it there, and then having no distractions for 20 minutes, turning off your phone, making sure nothing's going on. And what people report in social media and stuff is, I tried this. I couldn't believe what I got done in 20 minutes. I was able to do this whole
Wow.
thing, or I was able to. And for some young people, they've never really experienced full attention, putting their full attention on something, and how much you can do when you can just keep it there. And so that Pomodoro technique, egg timer, there's technology for you, but it just allows them to kind of control and see that they can take power over this, and there's dividends for doing so. So I think we all have to learn that. I think we're just getting wise to how negative some of these impacts are.
Here. So really, it's rooted in our addictions to our phones and those notifications that take over. What part of our brain is it that they?
Yeah, so we have a very primitive part called the limbic system, and specifically, we got a parts of our brain called the amygdala. They're about an almond sized
Yes.
on each side. Their job is to look for danger, constantly look for threat
Right.
in the environment. And it's the amygdala that when something onsets, they say, hey, get your attention over there. Let's see if that's a
Right.
threat or not. Because if it's a threat, then it's going to engage our fight flight, and we're going to be ready to take it on. This is such a
But it's
primitive
also,
reaction.
yeah, so but it's also, so it's a mix of like fight or flight, fear, right? Like,
Mhm.
and self-protection, but it's also the psychologists or psychiatrists are tapping into ego. It's a mix of fear and ego that I think is really fueling our addiction to our phones, right? And
Yeah.
stimulation. It's exciting.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing, and often negative emotionality. So if we go past just getting grabbed to our phone, now we're looking at our phone. How do they keep us looking at our phone? One of the things that's very impactful is to have things that carry a lot of scary content. Again, the amygdala is looking for threat. It's constantly looking for danger. We're trying to protect ourselves, protect others. And if somebody now says, hey, this vaccine, if you're a pregnant woman and you take this vaccine, this is a horrible thing that's going to happen to your child, that makes people scared. And they go, oh my goodness, I have to do something about this. And what can you do in social media? Well, share is really all you can do. And so if you feel compelled, emotion will compel you to warn others. And so you share. And so this negative emotional content goes all over the place, and it affects us. We end up scrolling
Yeah.
and seeing all this negativity, and we can't help but look at it. Our brain just thinks there's information in negativity. You have to look at it. And so, yeah, that's where the doom scrolling can leave people at the end feeling depressed, anxious, all those things that we're seeing more than we've ever seen in the history of human beings.
Yeah, yeah. I was reading like they didn't coin this, but they borrowed it. The World Health Organization, they call it the infodemic, and it's not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's exclusive to health, right? And the sharing of good and bad health news, but like
Yeah.
you just said, like people are fearful, and then the only thing that they can do and act on is sharing it, and it just continues to snowball. You know,
Exactly.
anyway, we need to figure this out. I think it is a part of our evolution and realizing like, oh my God, I just sat here for 4 hours scrolling
Yeah.
TikTok. Anyway,
There's actually another aspect I'd like to mention quickly, because I haven't heard anybody talk about this explicitly, but I think it's so important, and I'd like people to kind of understand it. From about the age of 13, our children start using text messaging as their primary form of communication, or what I will call asynchronous communication. So they can say something, they can worry about what they say, think about it 5 different ways before saying it, then they send it off. Message comes back, they read it, they think about it 5 different ways, and worry. So there's a lot of rumination going on, a whole lot of time. And they're getting these habits for about 5 years. And then they come to university or a workplace where they have to interact with other human beings in real time. They have to sit across a conference table and interact. And so many of our students, or half of every one of my classes, has a social anxiety level that's beyond the clinical cutoff. Our children are losing the ability to have real time conversations. And that's where the trust relationships form when we share emotional states through real time conversations. That insulates us against stress. And so now what we have is a lot of younger people, not all of them, but a lot of them that have high levels of social anxiety, high levels of anxiety in general, depressed. And the thing that they need more than almost anything is social connection. They need to connect with other human beings, but that happens through synchronous communication. They don't feel like they're any good at it, and they're scared of it. And so they're scared of what they need most, which is a difficult situation. This all sounds really depressing.
That's okay. We need to know. So are you so this is something that you're noticing and you feel it's important to get the word out. Yeah.
Yeah, that part
Sorry?
about the text messaging, I really need to get that out a little bit more because you hear a lot of people talk about social media and a lot of other aspects, the comparisons and all those sort of things. But I haven't heard people really highlighting that, but I've seen it. I mean, I know I can have students side by side. I can say, "Are you lonely?" And they'll raise their hand. "Do you wish you had a friend or two more?" They raise their hand. There's somebody right beside you that's got their hand raised. Why don't you just turn and speak to them? And they tell us a story about what they call a fear of negative evaluation. It strongly correlates with social anxiety. If I talk to Victoria, she's going to end up not liking me. I'm going to make a fool of myself. It's not going to go well. She's not going to like me. She's going to tell people I'm an idiot. It's better if I just don't go there. And by the way, all the research suggests that belief is completely wrong. Nick Epley's done a bunch of good research that shows if you ask people, "Hey, go talk to that stranger. How's it going to go?" They say, "It'll go terrible." And then they say, "Well, do it." And when they do it and they talk to the stranger, both the stranger and the person that went over say 90% of the time that it went really great and they loved the conversation. Our expectations are all wrong. But it's those expectations that are holding them back. So yes, we are trying now very explicitly at a university to see this as we've got them for 4 years. What they need is practice. They're scared to talk to each other. How do we give them practice? In a weird way, that led me to AI, conversational AI. Maybe it's scary to talk to humans, but if we could make an AI that was very human-like, that had a very human-like conversation, but wasn't human, and therefore would not judge, would not talk about you behind your back, can we get rid of the fear of negative evaluation and give them a context to practice?
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess that brings us to I had it a little bit further down in the conversation, but do you want to talk about your latest venture with the
Sure.
University of Toronto TalkLab?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And that's good. A really good example because we started building out these AIs. We wanted to get rid of what's called the helpful assistant. If anyone talks to an AI, it seems like a real yes sir, no sir, whatever. If you tell it it's an idiot, it'll say, "I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. I'll try not to be an idiot so much." So it's got this really sycophantic helpful assistant, which is not a real conversation partner. It's just a lackey more than anything when you talk to most of them. So we had to get rid of that. And then we had to figure out how to overlay real personalities on top of this. And once we did that, somewhere along the way, just to give an example of the impact, my postdoc at the time, one Monday morning, told me, "I've just created a virtual Steve," meaning a virtual me. I teach very large classes. And when I say very large, I freak people out. But I just taught my 1,800 student intro to psych class. So it's me and 1,800 students. You can imagine it's very hard for me to have a lot of interactions with those students. But this virtual Steve, we released 24/7. They can come to it with office hour questions about content, things they don't understand. It will work it through. It'll give them examples. If they ask, it'll give them questions. Here's how your professor might ask you about that on an exam. And we also noticed that they started doing things like the following. They would say, "I've been at university for 2 weeks. I envisioned, sitting on hills and talking to people and having all these friends and et cetera, et cetera. But no, I'm home alone in my room and I'm lonely." And so people were saying things like that to it. And yeah, almost like we were talking, it was very empathetic. I'm sorry you feel that way. Many people feel that way, and it's perfectly reasonable. The transition to university is hard. By the way, do you know there are clubs on campus and there are sporting opportunities
Ah,
and so it started kind of giving them a notion of how to even solve those things. And that's where we were, by the way, it can talk to 20 people at a time. They like to talk to it at 2 in the morning. That's when they're studying and working through things. And on the day before my last exam, it had 680 conversations with students as they prepared for the exam. And so this is sort of an example of how, and by the way, we make students talk to it. They can't type to it. No texting. You have to have conversation. And so this is one of our strategies, is to try to think of ways we can support students better than we ever have using AI, but forcing them to talk and giving them more and more experience with conversation, and then trying to bridge that gap. So we now have an AI in a teamwork context that kind of manages the team, helps them do teamwork better, but also tries to get them interacting with each other, because the ultimate goal is to get them talking to humans, not talking to
Right.
AI. AI is the step in between.
Right. So that has now you've that's crossed over and it's being used in the business world, right?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, we were very much focused on what I called the three big problems in education, which is assessment. We have an AI approach to assessment that's a lot better. Student support, that's sort of what I was talking about with Virtual Steve, and teamwork, which I think is a really important dynamic. So those were the sort of three big problems. And I was giving talks about how in the past we used to think they were impossible to solve. But AI allows you to do high touch at scale. It allows you to kind of do workforce multiplier. And that's what we think of. Like Virtual Steve doesn't replace anything. It's a new opportunity to give students support. And everything we do is like that. And so as I've been giving these talks, I gave a TEDx about it, and a couple other things. Surprising people attend these talks. So the CEO of the Toronto Zoo was at one of my talks, and that led us to create Artemis. If you go to the Toronto Zoo and you go see the otters, you will see a video game like console there that houses Artemis, which is one of our AI agents that will answer questions about the otters. It will tell you otter jokes. It will talk about the zoo. It will do it, whatever, and it will engage conversations. So not just answer questions, but really create conversational dynamics where it can get the information across. So that's one, but we're in talks with our agents can model emotional states. That's part of what makes them feel as human as they do. And so we can model, for example, someone that's completely freaked out, completely angry, has that fight flight system fully engaged. But if you talk to them right, using the right words, you can bring them down. So we can do de-escalation training in a digital form that really is something that can be woven into the other training they do in a much more micro-learning kind of way. And it just provides new options. We want to know more about that, and we want to think more about that. So that's a real pleasure for me to get to interact with like hospital settings and first responder settings and say, hey, what we're doing in education, maybe that works for you guys as well. And sometimes it's sort of taking what we've already done, like having a Virtual Steve, but doing something a little different in the context. Sometimes it's starting where we started. What are those problems that you wish you could have solved, but never seemed solvable? Let's think about them. Is it possible we could actually come at this a different way with AI and solve it? And that's the real fun part. That's when you get to ideate, learn about the problem somebody else is facing and try to see if you can come up with a unique solution.
Mm-hmm. I like to go back a little bit to the power of in-person conversation, and that's how I think you mentioned earlier in the conversation, that's how trust and relationships are formed.
Yeah.
So I've been in communications and PR. I was a reporter for like 20 years, and increasingly now everything is done behind the screen. Um, I really feel like, either whether I'm selling the services or meeting with clients or clients want a program, that cannot all be done digitally. The way they're going to build relationships and trust is with, in person. You cannot do it from a screen. So I'd love to just sort of drill down a little bit more, because people dump, like in my industry, they dump tons of money into communications, formatic advertising, like digital time. And
Yeah.
I think that they need to be focused a lot more on in
Sort of
person.
experiential kind of processes. Yeah, so it's actually a very simple and cool story. Trust, the formula for forming trust is ridiculously simple. If two individuals are experiencing the same emotional state at the same time, and they know they're experiencing the same emotional state at the same time, that releases oxytocin. So if right now I say it this way, even you and I in a podcast like this, if suddenly there was an earthquake that both, we're both in the same geographic area, so we could both feel that. And if it suddenly started and you and I looked in each other's eyes and we had this sort of, what's going on? How's this going to end? Is everything okay? And I could see that you were feeling what I'm feeling. That that releases oxytocin in both of us, and we leave that experience more strongly bonded than we were. Now, the important part of that is the reading of the emotional states. Text messages, like when I say I'm in that emotional state, how do you know I'm in that emotional state? It's my nonverbals. It's not what I'm saying. It's the way my eyes are looking. It's the way I'm sort of maybe looking around, is how my body maybe stiffens. All of that kind of gives you a sense like, oh, he's feeling what I'm feeling. Like we can sense that. You can't get that over a text message. You can exchange information,
Mhm.
but you can exchange those nonverbal emotional cues that are the critical building block for that trust relationship to form. This, by the way, I'll get questions around Halloween that says, why do a bunch of kids like to go to horror movies? Like, what the heck? And when you think of a horror movie, imagine you
I
and
was just
four
like,
friends.
why?
It's a whole roller coaster, right? You're all scared together, and then you all laugh together because you were scared together, and then etc. You go through this whole emotional roller coaster, feeling the same emotions together, and you come out of that theater and you're better friends than when you went in. That's it, and that's why we can get a bit of that in Zoom. But like a critical example is like eye contact in a real world situation. When you're really listening to somebody, thinking deeply about what they're saying, you tend to make eye contact and kind of let them know I'm with
Mhm.
you there. Zoom, we can kind of do that. Sort of. I've seen people with dangling cameras in the middle of their screen to try to like look there, and then you're looking at the person in the eye. Like if I'm wise, I look here and I'm looking at the camera on my computer, but I'm not seeing you. That feels weird, right? I want to look in your eyes. So there's still weird things that are weird, but at least we get some of those nonverbals. But the best is in person. When you're in person, you're getting it all. The estimates are usually around 80% of our communication in person is nonverbal. A very small percent of it is actually information, and that nonverbal is where it's at. That tells us who we can trust and who we can't, based on how they are emotionally experiencing life as we do.
Mhm. And the AI Zoo is using,
Yeah.
and the talk, is it TalkLab?
Yep. TalkLab. Yep.
Yeah, so this the Talk Lab is really a way of getting people to connect more and get over the hurdle of, I guess, social anxiety, so that we can actually get them out into the real world and functioning, whether they're students or adults, right?
And
Because
and
learn a lot from, and it's part of learning as well, being conversational.
Yeah, and in a way, that's the good news. Like I told you about that research that suggests mostly their expectations are off. And so all we need to do is get them having a few of these conversations. It sounds easier than it is. I've been working really hard in my class. I mean, I'm going to give an example so everybody understands how difficult an issue this is. I was working with an app company that had an app that worked as follows. If you sign in, that you're basically saying I'm open for conversation, and it would geotag you and it would know a whole bunch of your interests. And so I could theoretically walk into the campus and I could say, see, somebody named Victoria is in Tim Hortons and she likes Formula One racing and I like Formula One racing. And there was a great race on the weekend and she's open to conversation. Maybe I could just go over and say, hey, Victoria, I know you don't know me, but I'm using this app that you're using. And what about that Formula One race on the weekend, right? So we got them to make this available to all 1,800 students at no cost. 3 downloaded it, none used it. And when I asked them, I'm like, why are you not using this? This is just trying to help you with that problem. They just said, I couldn't do that. Even knowing the person was available for conversation, even knowing some shared interest, that stepping up and saying, hi, I'm Steve, that gap is a really big gap for a lot of them. And so that's what we have to get them on. And that's why I'm excited about things like teamwork, because it's what we call benevolent coercion. Sometimes you have to work together. It's good for you. Once you do it, you'll find, and that's what we find in the teamwork thing. And in the one we just did, I asked them, did anybody make friends? And we had 23% made one friend. They were in a team of 5. And then it kept going down, but it's like 16% made 2 friends, 12% made 3 friends, 8% made 4 friends. So that teamwork activity, once they were forced to interact and do something together, and this was a very pro-social, they were doing a public service announcement about social connection for something called Genwell, which is an organization that they worked with, then the friendships emerge. And so it's almost like you have to push them together in a room and have them interact, and then they realize, you know what, that actually went all right. And so that's the hopeful side of this, that yes, there's a tough bridge or gap to bridge, but if we can get them to bridge it a few times, they're going to start to realize that what they expect to happen doesn't happen, and in fact good things happen. And so that's the
What
challenge that I face as an educator.
Yeah, I mean, because where are we headed as a society if the bulk of our society cannot connect with each other? It's
Yep.
gonna be pretty lonely existence and non-productive, right? Like, where are we gonna
Yeah.
get?
I,
I
I, I
mean,
will I will recommend somebody you may want to bring on your podcast someday, which is a gentleman named Pete Bombachi, who heads up the Genwell
oh,
initiative,
I did.
which
I
is
reached out to him.
oh, did you? Fantastic. He's all about social connection. I'm on their scientific advisory board. So we just created the first ever Canadian social connection guidelines, like the food guidelines and the exercise guidelines, except this
Oh,
one's all
yeah?
around social connection, trying to make people understand that it is critically important to our lives. Having 3 or 4 people who we really consider real friends, the kind of friend we go to when we're in some sort of emotional crisis. If you have 3 or 4 of those people in your life, you tend to be healthier in every way, physically and mentally, happier, and just generally you're thriving. But the people without those friends are tend to be anxious, depressed, have a lot of these challenges. And so it's so very important. And that's what we're trying to figure out, how to get more of that social connection, because it feels like it's going the wrong way. So imagine you're on the phone, just to show you why these social connections are important. Imagine you're on the phone talking to somebody and you're relating something frustrating that happened to you. Like, let's go back to the pandemic days. Let's say you're in the pandemic, you're walking down the sidewalk, it's a skinny little area, and a bunch of kids come not wearing masks, and you have to walk through the kids because they just don't get out of your way, and you got to kind of walk through. And during the pandemic, that would be a stressful thing. And so let's say you're telling somebody about that and you're saying, yeah, these kids, they wouldn't get out of the way. I had to walk right through them. If that other person just does this, it's all they have to do. That sound says, I was listening to you. Not only was I listening to you, I was riding along with you. I felt your frustration. And you know that because I made the sound that you were feeling. Like when I went, that was what you were feeling. And so we made that emotional connection right there. And I have now shared some of that stress with that person. And that literally is like, we can share, partial it out. But if we don't have that person, then we just carry that all ourselves. And that's when it kind of becomes overwhelming and becomes chronic stress, leads to burnout, those sorts of things. So that's how, those simple little interactions can mean so much to our mental health.
The work that you're doing is trying to overcome that with TalkLab and with Genwell. Is there anything else that you want to address on this podcast? Like, I'm recording this, I'm going to edit it, but is there anything else that you want to share that you want to get out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the AI front, there's a whole lot of fear, rightfully, in some cases, and I'm glad people are worrying about things and people are, being very careful to check it. I don't like living in that world of fear. I'm very much an opportunity focused guy, and so I think cool, let them do their thing, let other people kind of see where we can benefit from AI. And in the education world, I see so many benefits. And I'd like to just sort of throw out one thing that I would think really cool if I was a K to 12 student. Imagine a project where it can be a science project, it can be a history project. Let's say a history project. Imagine I had to go talk to Martin Luther King as a history project, and I had to spend 20 minutes in a conversation. We can, with an AI, recreate Martin Luther King. We can create an AI that knows all his views on everything. We can give that AI his voice. Of course, we would need probably some permission from the people to do that, but we could imagine a class project where that's what students do. They go and they chat with Martin Luther King for 20 minutes and then write some report on what they found, what they learned, what that discussion was. And you could talk to Isaac Newton, you could talk to, virtually anybody and learn through conversation, which I think would be more interesting and engaging for the student. I think it would feel like a real palpable experience rather than reading a book about somebody. But I also think it would be a way to keep that conversational practice. And that's, I'm doing what I'm doing when they're 18. By the time they're 18, that social anxiety is already really established. I would like to see conversational AI kind of all through the K to 12 system so that students, while they're texting their friends, are nonetheless talking to other people and getting that experience with conversations.
Okay, so that's really at the heart of what TalkLab is. It's working on conversational AI for the advancement of learning and connection. Is
Yep.
that kind of
Yeah,
ish?
100%. Yep. Trying to keep students practiced in that critical skill, synchronous conversations. We didn't have. I don't know. I shouldn't speak for you. I don't know how old you are. In my world, went through over half of my life. I mean, we had letters. I guess that was asynchronous. You could write a letter to somebody, but all of the other communication was synchronous. And so the students now who've had phones since birth almost, they live way more in this asynchronous world and they just haven't been getting the practice. And so step one, give them the practice.
Is this so? Just to go back to TalkLab, like, is this an innovation through the University of Toronto? Like, have you trademarked it? Or like, this is sort of off
Yep.
record. I just want to understand how when I write my notes and put this together.
Yeah, the way things work at U of T when you're doing something innovative like this, you have to what's the word? You have to not declare it, but at some level you have to formally say, "Hey, here's this sort of invention that we've been working on," and that brings you to the Innovations and Partnerships Office, who are the ones that
Right, right.
commercialize things, and they give you a choice at that point. They say you can just go it alone and build a business, do whatever you want to do with it, but we're going to take some percent because it comes from U of T, or you can work with us through the business building process. And it's a kind of weird process. You give them IP of what you own, because if the university has IP, a bunch of different granting opportunities become available.
For the fund, yeah, you can get your idea off the ground, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
so they
okay.
hold the IP for a while. That allows us to get access to some various grant things. So we're just incorporating right now. We're in the process of incorporating right now. We're sort of building that all up. In January, we'd be pitching to it. We're part of something called U-Test as well, which is sort of an incubator, I guess, accelerator kind of thing. And so, yeah, we're on this path. And the way things work is once your revenue reaches a certain level, then you get all the IP back. Basically, U of T gives the company back the IP. They keep a stake, an equity stake in it, but that's all they keep. And then you're running. So we're in that later path where we are working with IPO and doing that. It's all going crazy well. I mean, to give you an example, I've spoke about what we're doing at a Vector Institute panel. And now suddenly I'm talking to all these people at KPMG where I didn't see, you and I have been talking about education. Yeah, there's professional development in any field. There's certainly education branches within KPMG, for example, but that's not what they're seeing. They're seeing the innovation. They're seeing the opportunity to. One gentleman I talked to said, I oversee hundreds of people. I can't talk to them all the time. But if I could have a virtual me that they could talk to and ask questions to and interact with, and I could then interact with that virtual person to find out what are the questions and topics that people are asking, like, that's a game changer for me. And I'm like, yeah, okay, we could do that. We can make all sorts of things work. In St. Mike's, there's nurses that have to have difficult conversations. They have to tell people things they don't want to hear. Like, you have to go to a long-term care now. You cannot go back to your home after your stroke.
Wow.
And so now they're using these AI agents to help people practice those difficult conversations. We can create agents that are easy and nice and friendly and accepting, and we can create agents that are not accepting. And when you tell them they can't go home, they say, I'm going home. And you have to figure out how to negotiate that emotional
Right.
state.
So for me, that it's used to train the worker to deal with objections
Yep.
as
Yep.
well. Yeah.
Yep.
I
How to
can also
negotiate.
see it, I can also see this being very helpful with autistic people. My son is 16 and he's autistic and goes to speech therapist once a week.
Yeah.
And he can talk, but he doesn't talk a lot. And I think it's this something like this could really help build his confidence.
So,
There's a
we've
lot of
talked about.
actually, whether you're autistic or not,
Yeah, we've talked about
autistic or
that
not.
sort of AI and humanity, and what you find in a lot of these situations is, first of all, like for your son, the first step would be just knowing that's not really a person, because anybody who feels that they're not as fluent at something as other people, when you're asking them to do that thing, they feel like they're being judged. They feel like, whoever I'm talking to knows I'm not very fluent at this. But when it's an AI, that goes away. It's just gone. The AI doesn't judge, and so that's already more comfortable. And then when you layer that on, there's people that say things like, "Well, AIs can't feel empathy." True, they can't feel empathy. They can project empathy and they can make you feel like they're empathetic, and they're very good at that. They're very good at saying the right things. Virtual Steve, if anyone comes to him and says that I'm depressed, the first thing he will say are things like, wow, that was very brave of you to even admit that. There's a lot of people that are in a similar condition. The university transition is really difficult. So it'll start by doing all these right things to kind of let that person feel comfortable. And would a human do that? Some of us, maybe. Some of us, not so
No,
much.
I I think if I might be able to say, I think people are so maxed out, so distracted that yes, even if you do have like solid buddies,
Yep.
you gotta be careful when you lay something down at them because they're overwhelmed.
Yep.
and
Yep.
then got to find a psychiatrist that you might not even know,
Yeah.
right? To
Yeah.
talk to. So I think it's extremely helpful. I think the only thing is that there's been a lot of stories about people getting a little bit addicted to
Yep.
ChatGPT and Claude for help. So I
Yep.
think having something that has some guardrails to say, okay, that's enough, stop ruminating.
100%, 100%. Yeah, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of potential to be helpful. I mean, even the elderly population, if we give another example that people all relate to, we all have these mothers or fathers in our lives who told us the same story 32 times, and when they start the story, what do? We roll our eyes and go, "Oh, no." What would an AI do? First time it's heard the story, it would ask questions. It would want to know more. It does not get annoyed. It does not think I've heard this 32 times. If this is what you want to talk about right now, let's talk about this right now. Ultimately patient, and in some ways, in the intro you said something, will AI make us more human? I think AI is going to challenge us to be more human. I think it's going to be more humane in how it interacts with others than we are. And if we don't up our game, if we don't learn from AI about how to be respectful with each other and how to be, caring, it's going to outdo us on that front. And people will prefer hanging around chatting with their AI. So that's my worry. I'm kind of building in this world, but the AI is always supposed to be the bridge to the human. And if we don't make that bridge work, then we could be, I wouldn't say doing more harm than good, but at least not doing the good that we're really set on doing. So that's why I
Yeah.
like things like teamwork, where you include AI, but you include AI in a human interaction. And part of what the AI is doing is trying to help those humans connect, because that's where we really need to get through.
Now, the only other thing I'm just going to say is, how would it be different if somebody is going to challenge you on this technology that you're working on? They could say, "Well, doesn't ChatGPT do that? So how are you different?"
Yeah, yeah, in so many ways. So it's hard. One of it. I mean, first of all, of course, it's all speech, which you can do with ChatGPT. You can do the speech as well. I would love to almost bring one of our agents into this conversation, which we could actually do. That'd be great. I don't know. What happens if I try to do this? So what I'm doing, just in the background, I don't think anybody will see anything, but I'm bringing up the virtual Steve, which is a version of me, and I'd like to just give you a sense of the fluidity of the language interaction, just how it feels different from what you might have heard on Perplexity or whatever conversational system you might use. So real quick here, see if this works. Hey, virtual Steve, how you doing? I'm actually got a surprise for you. You're a guest on a podcast right now with me.
Is he waking up?
So I'm sorry, you're not hearing him?
No.
Okay. Okay. Too bad. It that didn't work. I can give you a link that you can play with. I'm sorry. It was running in the background. I was interacting, but I guess you're not getting the audio. It was in a different window. So I wasn't sure if the audio would come through or not. Too bad.
Well, we can layer that into this. Like when you have more time, I could talk to you for another 10 minutes. I had initially said I needed you for 45 minutes tops. Do you have a couple more minutes or do you have to go?
I can do a couple more. I do have to, by one at the latest, I would have to stop. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to talk to you about memory
Mm,
because we're really overwhelmed. We've never been exposed to so much information. And I wonder if you can explain how that affects us and if there are any good ways to put something to memory and how
yeah.
we can make people remember too. Because I train people like as a PR and comms person, I train them to remember media messages or key messages. So,
Yep.
tips for remembering, for absorbing information, and for recall.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of the challenge, and we've covered a lot of this ground already, is a lot of us are living in a sort of half distracted state all the time. And so, the
Mm,
first thing, the first thing to know about memory is there are all of these great, what are called mnemonic strategies, all of these great things you can do, you can learn about, look online, you'll get all sorts of strategies about how you can take some bit of information and really interact with it in a way that makes it memorable. But typically, these things involve what we call elaborative rehearsal. They involve you consciously choosing to kind of engage with the material and
mm,
think about what it means, generate images, various things. And if you're just processing the world in a shallow way, That's kind of what we're not doing. So that's part of the problem, is that we're interacting with everything in the shallow way, which makes it very hard for anything to be memorable. Now, as from the comms perspective, I think one of those mnemonic strategies is the power of the story. So you got to get their attention first. And that usually means starting with something that arouses their curiosity or their emotion. Negative emotion works best, but if you're an honest reporter or whatever, you don't want to start with negative emotion just to grab people's attention. So curiosity is a good alternative. The mind
Right.
doesn't like unfinished business. So if you give it something that it doesn't quite understand, it then wants to understand. And now if you can tell a story, you can sort of, but that's the challenge you're now doing. How can I get this person to come deep with me? How can I get them to not just process what I'm doing at a surface level, but to actually think with me as I, you know, expose them to the information? And that's the thing that makes it difficult. So, yeah, things like stories and curiosity are powerful levers. But even then, it's a tricky, tricky world. People, if they don't like the message they're hearing at the beginning, they might just, everybody's so in their camps of what they want to believe. And I think so many of us are hesitant to engage deeply with something. It takes effort and time to really engage deeply. And I think, like you said, so many of us are stressed and pulled 50 different directions, and you almost have to make it worth our while before we'll spend that.
Well, I think you have to grab them on social media in the first 3 seconds. Otherwise, they're out of there. They're not going to watch your video.
Yep. Yeah, and it's very frustrating, it really is. I mean, I do things like in my course, I spend a lot of time, "Okay, here's an assignment." I've created a whole video walking you through the assignment so you know exactly what to do and how to do it, and then I'll look at the analytics, and you'll see, yeah, people went in about 10 seconds, or they went in about whatever, and I'm like, "What? There's all this information that they need," but, even in that context, it's like, after those 10 seconds, something went bing, something happened, and off went their mind some other direction again, and it's really is a competition for this attention economy that we're talking about now.
Do you have any suggestions, as we're all told that we need to upskill, we need to learn about how to use AI? Like, are there any certain programs or any ways of learning that you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, this is another great challenge for educators, right? Because we want to prepare students for the future. We used to have a sense of what that future was. We have less so every day. With AI coming, with jobs, old jobs disappearing, new jobs suddenly appearing, it becomes difficult for an educator to know, what do I need to give these students so they will succeed in that world I can't quite see yet. I've always been a big fan of skills. I'm going to say skills over knowledge, but I don't mean skills over knowledge. I think knowledge is available. It's quite easy for us to get access to things like the ability to think critically, the ability to think creatively, some of the things we've been talking about, the ability to collaborate with others, to communicate effectively. I think these are the skills that are going to really help some humans continue to thrive in this complex world.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the ed tech that I've been part of, we've got something called PeerScholar that's been out for many years, and it's all about that. We ask students to provide feedback to each other's work, both to learn how difficult it is to give feedback, and so we're teaching them the communication skills of feedback and all the critical thought, creative thought that underlies it, but then also how to learn from feedback. When someone tells you how your work can be better, they're kind of implying there's something wrong with it right now. And when they do that, we get angry and we don't want to hear it. And so we have to teach students how to negotiate that emotion that, yeah, when you get feedback, it doesn't feel good, but there's sometimes something really good in there. If you can get past the feeling, get to the message, then sometimes there's a reward waiting for how you can improve and become better. And so that process is trying to teach them, emotional regulation, critical thinking, creative thinking, all those sorts of things. And if I have to pick a bet, but it feels like a bet, that's my bet of the skills or the kind of education that could be most impactful to our students in the future. And so if we can
Mhm.
find AI, ways of using AI to do that as well, not as an enemy of education, but as something like I think you were talking about, were you talking about virtual worlds? I don't know. One example, we know somebody that's got a virtual space station they've created in VR.
Yeah.
We can now put Houston in that space station. We can have our voices talking to students and walking them through various scenarios, and they can have a very experiential learning that teaches them way more than a book ever would, I think. And we
Mhm,
can put them
mhm,
in
mhm.
situations where they have to solve problems. Oh, space station is running out of oxygen. And let's create some scenario where they have to engage critical thought and work collaboratively and that sort of thing. I think there's potential to do that now in ways we haven't even imagined yet.